So welcome to today's webinar on Agile HR in a nutshell, reinventing people operation practices, where we're going to explore what it means for HR to go agile and what are the implications for HR in the future of work. And this slide here was to find out who works in HR, but I know it's going to be Michelle and Carolina. So welcome you both. And whoever watches the recording, excited to hear your thoughts and any questions you have. Please do email us. Love engaging that way as well. So I am your host today, Kari Kelly. I'm an Agile coach with Dandy People. I've worked in a variety of industries as a coach, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. So let's dive in. So a lot of organizations, functions, teams, people are wanting to go agile. But why? What's driving them to that decision? Well, we're all experiencing this, that in today's world, we only know the tip of the iceberg when we start, well, anything. And the reason is because we live in a VUCA environment. That means we're experiencing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and it's ambiguous. And yet, in spite of all those factors, we're still expected to respond quickly to market changes, become more innovative, to deliver more value to the customer faster, to solve more complex problems, to collaborate, to work quicker, to make quicker decisions, and so on. And Agile helps us achieve these results, no matter what kind of environment we live in. And that's really what's driving this move to agility today. And HR plays an absolutely critical role in helping organizations who want to go agile. And why is that? It's because HR develops the products, services, and policies that are required for systemic change. And even back in 2017, HR professionals saw this clearly. 94% of those that Deloitte had interviewed recognized that agility and collaboration were going to be keys to success in the digital age. So if it was 94% back in 2017, it's a lot higher now. And the great news, at least for me, is that it's not just about HR supporting agile organizations. HR itself wants to become more agile. And why is that? What's driving this move of HR wanting to become more into the scene of agility? Well, to deliver solutions faster, to become more transparent, more responsive, more adaptable, more collaborative structures in place, and more incremental change and less big bangs. And that's really where my story with Agile HR comes into the picture. I was a research theoretical physicist who happened to fall in love with adult learning. I loved creating that aha moment in people's minds when they understood complex concepts and it made them clear as day for them. And they go, oh, I get it. And I wanted to learn more about it. So I found my way into adult learning and development, where then my mission became finding that sweet spot between employee value, business value, and customer value, and when creating my learning and development solutions. So I would make a plan. Just like a good scientist, I would create a hypothesis. I would embed myself with the teams I was working with, work with them to create some ideas around how we can tackle these gaps in knowledge or performance. And then we'd experiment. We'd run pilots with our ideas, get feedback from the folks who were a part of it. And then we would take appropriate action together, figure out what we wanted to keep, scale, tweak, pitch. It was something we did together, and the solutions were highly effective. And one example is we took an onboarding program that was over 12 months. It was that complicated to get new hires up to performing at a good level. We scaled it down to 2 months just by working together in this manner. And little did I know, I was participating in something called the Deming cycle, which those who are familiar with agility knows that this is a key idea from the lean agile world, named after Edward Deming. It's essentially the scientific method, an empirical process for working in the midst of ambiguity and the VUCA environment mentioned earlier. And that's how I found my way into Agile HR. I thought I was using a unique approach and I was looking for more like-minded people. And I found myself engaging with people in this Agile movement, mostly from IT. And then discovered here in Sweden, a group of Agile HR folks who were doing trainings and such. And I got involved with them. And that is what launched my career as an Agile coach now, working with all different functions. And so that's why this topic is particularly near and dear to my heart. So let's dive in. And what we'll see is that there are two sides to the Agile HR coin. The first is what we're going to be tackling, which is Agile for HR. That's where we are applying an Agile mindset, Agile principles, and ways of working within HR teams. So these are HR teams who want to become more agile within the team. We're also going to look at HR for Agile, evolving your HR services and processes to support an Agile organization. And what you'll hopefully see by the end is that by going Agile, HR can better support Agile. They go together so nicely. And in today's conversation, we're going to see some tips, some reflection opportunities, and even case studies for getting started. Now, most of these will be in the PDF that we'll send out afterwards. And don't worry about taking notes also, unless you really want to, if that helps you as a learner, because you're going to get a copy of these slides. And then at the end, in the appendix, will be the case studies. And then I'll take the little tips and reflection opportunities, and you'll find them in the appendix as well, all together instead of having to search through the slides. And what we're going to go ahead and do is save questions for the end, if that's all right with you. That way we can look at the content at hand. Odds are a lot of your questions will get answered just by the content we'll be going through. And then at the end, we'll have about 15 minutes where we can answer your questions, and feel free to write them in the chat, as Pernilla is going to be at the end taking any questions you have and sharing them so we can have some good conversations together. All right, so Agile for HR. We're going to, skip a slide. There are 5 particular areas we're going to look at. First, mindset, then ways of working, co-created employee experience, evidence-based, and value-driven. Starting with embracing the mindset. Now, some of you may have seen this graphic that beautifully visualizes the journey to agility, where we start with implementing agile tools, processes, and practices, internalizing the values and principles, and then ultimately achieving an agile mindset. Now, when it comes to agile processes, tools, and practices, these can easily be adopted in a command and control manner, meaning a manager can simply say, hey, team, next week, we are going to start using Scrum. That's what we're going to use as the way of working in our team starting next Monday. Easy to do, easy to just flip that switch and say, we're going to start doing it. But you know what? Whoops. If you really want to become agile, there are huge opportunities to be had when it comes to internalizing the values and principles. That's how true agility happens. And that requires structural and cultural change when you internalize those values, internalize those principles. And that is where HR involvement is especially critical. And that's because we want the organizational structure itself to reinforce these agile behaviors on the front line. So if a manager and a team decides to go agile using Scrum or something, then it's so important that the organization itself supports it with the different structures and the culture itself. And HR's role is huge in that, as well as in the, moving towards a learning organization. And that's the ultimate goal of becoming agile. So the organization as a whole can actively respond to the changes in the marketplace and to different situations at hand. So that's the journey to agility. And the mindset itself, again, you're going to hear me touch on that quite a few times, because that's the ultimate aim of becoming agile. It's not just adopting tools and practices. It's getting an agile mindset, which means naturally responding in ways that are consistent with Agile values, principles, and practices. Very important, because Agile tools and techniques, just like I wanted to call out here on the slide, they don't make an organization Agile. It is that mindset shift. So for an organization as a whole to reach that place of agility, those principles and values must be internalized all throughout the organization, even at the highest levels. And part of that mindset shift is actually customer centricity. That's huge. And when it comes to HR becoming agile, that means employee centricity. Now, just like I've been really hitting home, it's not about adopting agile ways of working that makes someone or a team agile. It's that mindset. So similarly, HR doesn't get an employee-centric mindset just by implementing agile. It really is working towards internalizing those values, internalizing those principles. That's massive. So what are they? Let's take a look at the Agile HR Manifesto. We are uncovering better ways of developing an engaging workplace culture by doing it and by helping others do it. And how that looks is by having new priorities. That means valuing, for instance, collaborative networks over hierarchical structures, transparency over secrecy, adaptability over prescriptiveness, inspiration and engagement over management and retention, intrinsic motivation over extrinsic reward. Whoops, I'm sorry, there seems to be a delay with my button pressing today. I apologize for that. Ambition over obligation. I don't want to miss that last one. These are pretty radical for some traditional HR teams. Huge. So let's take a moment and reflect. Now, this is just to get your gears turning, not to give too much time. That'll be for after this session, but wanted to just give a few questions for you to think about. Do you have an Agile HR mindset? Are you continuously uncovering better ways of doing what you do and trying them? What do you value as an HR team? Can you point to tangible examples of how you're living the values every day? Or are they just something posted on your wall? On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to be described as being agile by your employees, your stakeholders, or your team? Just some things you can reflect on. Again, they'll be in the appendix of the slides you'll get, but just wanted to share them here to get your gears turning. Now let's look at ways of working. This is what most people think about when they hear that someone or a team is going agile. Now, surprise, surprise, there is no recipe. It's all about trying and learning. And most people start with this is such a powerful way of starting to introduce some agile ways of working to your team. And what that means is using one of these boards, it's called a Kanban board, to visualize the work coming down the pike, which is known as the backlog column. And those different rows just correspond to different types of work. So what is all the work that you have as a team coming down the pike? And then what about the to-do items? What work needs your attention now? That goes under the to-do column. The work that you're doing now, that's under the doing column. And then done. What are the things completed? What can you get back to folks on in the business and say, hey, I'm ready for you to take a look at this. I've got the solution or project finished for you. Such a powerful way to start an agile journey. Some examples in the HR world for Kanban, or those visualization boards, is in recruitment, actually. A wonderful way of making very clear and transparent the application process itself, or the recruitment process, and the different statuses of the applicants. So that way a hiring manager, instead of a lot of email correspondence or any convoluted misunderstandings around who's in what stage, they can just take a look at the recruitment Kanban. And some Agile teams, Agile HR teams, even have a shared HR team Kanban board. And what that means is all the different HR functions are represented on a single board where the different phases of their work are the different columns. And then it makes transparent the amount of work that is happening in each of the HR functions, which is amazing because it, first of all, encourages a team perspective of HR work, that when a piece of work comes into the HR as a team, how is it impacting all the different roles? And if, for example, the recruiter, let's say there's a few of them, they just have one item in to do with nothing in progress, they could say, hey, learning and development, do you need any help? Can we jump in and help you in any way? Or maybe this is a good time for them to start shadowing each other's roles. That's another powerful way to start working as a team in new ways, and how these types of visualization boards can help. You can also start with adding cadenced events. Some fun experimenting can happen here. Maybe beginning with retrospectives. And this is as simple as saying, hey, team, let's start meeting together as an HR team to uncover what should we stop, start, and continue. And what is something that we can try together just to see how we can improve our ways of working. Some teams start like that. There's also, synchronization meetings. This is where the Agile HR teams can, in the morning, get together a few times a week, every day. It depends on the nature of the work, but just an opportunity for teams to stay synchronized on all the work coming in HR using one of those HR visualization boards to find opportunities to support each other, maybe to shadow, maybe to come together and swarm to solve problems or move items to done, like we saw with the learning and development opportunity. And then sprint planning. This is also really fun. This is where you look at the work coming into HR and think about how you might design the work itself in a way that allows for small releases of value that you can learn and iterate from. And then as you release those pieces of value, for instance, in learning and development, I had a bunch of pilot sessions. I would create a small version of a learning and development program, pilot it, get feedback, expand it. And that naturally leads to what are known as sprint reviews. That's where you release the value that you've created. In my case, a pilot for a training program to solve a specific business problem. I get feedback on the small version of it. We scale it, get rid of what doesn't work, add what works better, and so on. Some great ways to begin. And other teams use what's known as a hybrid approach. They'll keep some traditional ways of working in HR, but just start experimenting and add some of these agile ways of working. But no matter what approach you use, it's so important that you continuously reflect, inspect, and adapt it because you want it to be fit for purpose. In other words, what works for your team today, odds are it's not going to be the ideal fit next week, next month, next year. It's so important to have regular conversations to make sure that how you're working together is meeting your needs as a team and the needs of the business and moving you towards the agile mindset. Because again, that is so critical. And you may have heard this before, that it's not just about doing agile. It's about being agile. It's so important when you're starting your agile journey. So reflection. Again, you'll find this in the appendix so you can come back to it later. But what is one small thing you can start doing right now that'll make your team more agile? Maybe start with using a visualization board to just visualize your current work. Start with holding daily focused synchronization meetings for your team to get aligned on in key areas. Start with introducing retrospective meetings to learn about what's working and what's not working and find out at least one thing to try. And maybe even start with inviting team members with different expertise to shadow each other. All very powerful ways. And that's actually how a woman I met, she works for Walmart. She is an HR manager of an HR team, I think in the Atlanta office. And she had formally asked her bosses if she could transform her team using Agile HR. And they said no, but she did it anyway on the fly using what I shared. So she started with encouraging her team members to start shadowing each other. Hey, so-and-so from recruiting, why don't you sit with learning and development, maybe 1 hour or 2 hours each week? Hey, comp and benefits, why don't you sit with recruitment for a few hours a week and had people getting to know each other's roles. At first, folks were resistant. They didn't really understand why. And she'd explain it, but they were like, okay, I'll say yes because you're my boss. But the most incredible thing happened. They started understanding each other's roles and worlds, and they can jump in to help. And we're actually excited about spending time with each other. They got more productive faster. So Veronica is her name. She said, you know what? Why don't we start meeting every morning and just visualize our work and see what we can do to help each other? They started getting work done even faster. Hey, why don't we start meeting regularly to see what we should stop, start, and continue? That got them even more productive, more responsive, to where the head office said, Veronica, what are you doing? Your results are incredible. Again, she tried to show them agility, went over their head, but there she did it. She did a covert, successful, agile transformation in HR, and the business results were phenomenal. So these steps look basic, but they're so powerful. So I wanted to share that story. And there are 3 success factors. If you're getting excited and want to begin, got to keep in mind these 3 factors. First one is no more knowledge silos. It's delivering value as real cross-functional, cross-skilled teams to solve complex problems together. That's what Veronica really saw. And I think that's why she started with the shadowing, people getting to know each other's roles. So much power in that. So working together as a team, just like they do in software development. And no more developing solutions in a vacuum. Instead, delivering value as a team in a way that's informed by feedback from the customer. So involving the people we're serving, the employees, the folks on the front lines. And no more big bangs. This is massive. Instead of just a big bang transformation, meaning starting next Tuesday, we're going to all be working in this new way, or we're going to go live on this or that. Instead, break down these big complex deliveries into smaller chunks of work and start delivering value earlier and more often. And we'll see later how that lowers risk, and it's an absolute win-win. So how might you start with this? Delivering smaller increments of value. Well, think about a big project that you're working on. What part of the whole solution would already be valuable for your organization, teams, and people? Even if the whole solution's not baked yet, what can you introduce right now? Maybe learn from it. Or ask yourself, what's the biggest value? What does the feedback tell you? Where does the effort to deliver make sense? And maybe you could just build that first and then continue evolving it, adding features and other parts. And then what happens when you incorporate feedback from the organization on what you're releasing? Does it work? Does it not work? Just some things to reflect on. Now let's jump into co-created employee experience, which is super fun. A very fun place to start. Whoops. And in traditional HR, and at least where I was working, and I'm guilty of this myself, being quick to make assumptions and follow best practices. I cannot tell you how many times I was guilty of saying, well, according to adult learning best practices, blah, 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 and I would override data I was getting from the organization. It's so easy to do that. Or even trust the highest paid person's opinion in the room. Well, if the VP of culture and so on says this, then it must be the right way, or so on. So easy to default to those. But you know what? We need to break the chains and invite the people into the process. Collaborate and co-create all the HR solutions. Visualize to get a shared understanding, not only within HR, but to invite the organization into it. Experimenting together with the employees, finding together what works, what doesn't work. And the best part is then change management happens naturally because people support what they help create. When you invite people into the change, they change manage themselves. It's so powerful. Uh-oh, my keys are doing it again. There we go. So how do you start with this, inviting folks into the work, the voice of the customer into what you're doing? Well, one thing you could do is go to where the people are. Ask what they think of your ideas. Maybe even shadow them for a few hours. That's what I did when creating comprehensive learning and development solutions for particular units or departments. I would actually park and my desk there and be with them. and share thoughts and co-create. Surveys are also powerful if you make sure you really are clear as to the why behind the survey and that you're very transparent about the data you're collecting. Let folks know quickly what the survey results are. Let them know how the results are going to tie into your solution. And if you create that kind of high-level trust, then surveys can be very powerful. Otherwise, people can get survey fatigue, but they are really good data points to collect. And then you can also create reference groups from different parts of the organization to help create maybe the first pilot and evolve from there. We did some change management for an entire agile transformation that way, using a reference group, involving people. They supported it. They're the ones who changed managed the whole organization. We didn't have to do very much because the people involved did it themselves and on our behalf. So powerful. So let's look at evidence-based. Yeah, so we're always testing what works and what doesn't work directly with our people. That's why Agile HR transforms HR into an evidence-based way of working. It's so powerful. It's because we don't have to guess anymore. We're getting data on how our solutions are performing. And if an experiment fails, if a pilot doesn't go well, then we can just leave the idea. We don't have to continue building the solution around it. It's okay, it's low risk. And so how do you start with that when becoming more evidence-based from where you are today? Well, I recommend starting with the question, how are you currently validating that your HR solutions are delivering the value that you're aiming for? I mean, are you even validating? And if not, how might you start? And that includes your talent acquisition strategy, training and development solutions, performance management system, your policies, your processes, and so on. Invite feedback, see how they're working, how they're not working. Such valuable data that you can use as a starting point for your Agile HR transformation. Now let's look at value-driven, okay? So Agile lowers the risk of releasing any product to the organization. Why, though? Why? How can iterative design, experimentation, customer feedback, collaborative work, how does that lower risk? Well, it's because we're constantly validating the value with our customers. And in HR, there's always high-risk projects, and that's why this risk conversation is so important. We don't know much at the start, but yet so many high-risk topics and projects come into play. And it's so easy to have a lot of assumptions. So in this case, the only way to get validation for moving forward is to release incremental pieces of work so that you can get the evidence you need to move forward, and that decreases risk. So let's look at how this works. So take, for example, an Agile HR team. Suppose they get a request from the business. And the mindset would be, whoops, let us use the information available to us right now so we can quickly deliver a small version of the solution to try it out. This way we can meet real business needs, we can learn, and we can keep building until the goal is achieved. So that's how an Agile mindset would think about a business request coming in. And you can see beautifully how that lowers risk. Decisions are made using the information that's available at that time. It's the most relevant information. It's that just-in-time moment, and a piece of value is delivered. What can we do right now that'll help meet this business need? Something is introduced to the organization, you get feedback, and you create something else. You add to the solution. You figure out what to stop, start, continue, scale. And delivering in this way, in incremental deliveries with these iterative improvements, validated from feedback by users, whew, the goal is not only a beautiful custom solution, but it's often met even earlier than planned. It's such a great way to work. And that's as opposed to the traditional waterfall approach to working, where all difficult decisions are made at the very beginning, and then one big bang solution is delivered, analyzing without planning, without testing, changing the plan. All of that leads to late surprises, not meeting business goals, not even meeting employee needs. And this is where a lot of my HR experience when it came to corporate HR initiatives lived, was in this bigger bang approach. And it was such an exciting breath of fresh air to find an alternative, this Agile HR way of working, to mitigate that risk. And as you can see, such different mindsets, two very different ways of thinking, two very different ways of working. That waterfall faith-driven change, faith that all your decisions up front will be the right ones versus, hey, let's just see what we could do right now to meet that need and learn from it and keep scaling as it makes sense. Because in Agile, you always get feedback from the customer, and that's how you know you're on the right track. That's really what makes it so low risk. And that feedback then guides that next increment of work, that beautiful cycle. So when it comes to getting started on value-driven, what HR solution are you working on right now that you could slice up in a way that you could pilot something small for quick impact, quick learning, and quick feedback? In other words, a solution that's good enough for now and safe enough to try that you can learn from. All right. So hope that satisfied your curiosity around Agile for HR. What can HR teams do to become more agile within the HR team? So let's now explore HR for Agile. We're going to look at evolving your HR services and processes so they can support an agile organization, okay? But what does that really mean? If we're going to be building agile organizations, then what does this mean for HR? What's HR's role? How does HR need to redesign their services? And when it comes to this annual cycle, how does HR shift from their annual performance reviews, annual budgeting to a just-in-time business cycle? Moreover, how might the Agile HR mindset could be used to even better support Agile teams and organizational transformations? How do we incorporate the Agile onion here? So we're going to unpack that by looking at these 3 points: organizational design for Agile, understanding Agile organizations, and Agile HR services. All right. When it comes to designing an agile organization, HR must redesign its people practices. And how? Well, in a way that's congruent with customer centricity, new agile roles, teams that make data-driven decisions, alignment, autonomy, even clear leadership vision and purpose. Because these are all factors that agile teams are aspiring to work towards throughout an organization that wants to become agile. So those of us in HR, it behooves us to step back and say, okay, if these are the goals of the teams that we're supporting, how do we support them on this journey? And that includes the faster cycle, because the budgetary needs and the feedback loops when it comes to supporting an agile organization has to be a lot faster than the annual cycle. And that's where we can look again at the journey to agility, the Agile onion, where we saw that HR comes really into play with these structural and culture changes to create an organization that supports these agile ways of working. And that means, for instance, alignment of the HR competency models to agile ways of working, alignment of compensation and benefits to agile ways of working, alignment of cultural norms, alignment of performance management, even policies and practices to agile ways of working. This is a big call to action for those of us in HR. So when it comes to getting started, it's not a call to action to just do a big bang dismantle, not at all. It's about that co-creation we've been talking about. Agile HR is all about co-creating the new fit-for-purpose organizational structures with the people who'll be using them, using the approaches we talked about in this session today. And that includes, again, the talent acquisition structures, training and development, performance management, policies, practices, all sorts of things that the business looks to HR to provide. And when it comes to the planning cycle, well, to determine which one is best for your organization right now, some good questions to ask yourself is, well, how long will your annual plan actually be valid in real life? What is it? Like performance reviews. How long will that information actually be valid? How long will it actually be helpful? How long will the budget plans that you make be valid? When might you require another time to look and say, hey, we need to revisit the budget because we're finding new needs emerging that we didn't see at the beginning of the year? And when do you usually need to change the plans? So when it comes to these annual cadences you have, how long are these plans actually valid? And when do you typically need to change them? Just some things to reflect on. Now let's look at understanding agile organizations. So there are several ways to scale agile. But at the end of the day, it's all just about teams. All these approaches are different ways of creating a team-based organization where communication, information, and decision-making power is all pushed down into and throughout the team-based organization, moving from what you see on the left-hand side, that hierarchical construct where communication, information, decision-making is all up and down, transforming it into a network where it's pushed into and throughout so that you can have that autonomy and alignment that we talked about earlier as being critical in an agile organization. Now, when it comes to the overall transformation of an organization to become like that, more network, it's not about just introducing one giant model and then going live. The key is to do emergent transformations and co-create a contextual design that's right for your culture and your industry. Always starting small, scaling what works, and then seeing what emerges from it. So the different scaling methodologies you saw on that slide earlier, like Scrum at Scale and SAFe, and even the Spotify model, they all have different helpful structures. But at the end of the day, it's finding what might you steal from one of those methodologies that could be helpful in this organization you're in, and steal from another, let's say Scrum at Scale, steal this idea from SAFe, see what works, what doesn't work, and let your particular way of transforming into agility be unique for you. Let it emerge, because you can't just take one model and implement that. It's all about, again, starting small, scaling what works, and having that emergent transformation that's often a hybrid of different approaches. So how do you get started with that? Well, first and foremost, don't do a big bang transformation. I strongly encourage you not to go down that path, because agile organizations emerge from starting small and scaling what works and continuously improving. And to determine what approach to use, you could reflect on questions such as these. Are there any existing high-performing agile teams in your organization? If so, find out what they're doing. Find out how they got started. Learn from them, because they are in your cultural context. It's so helpful to find out what worked and didn't work for those teams. And do you have any teams ready and willing to try some of the good practices that we talked about? Any early adopters? If so, invite them to try it out. Share some ideas. You want to find those early adopters that are going to share in your energy and excitement to pilot some of these initiatives. And you can learn a lot and even build a business case ultimately, depending on the route you choose and what works and doesn't work. Now, finally, let's look at Agile HR services. And what I mean by that is HR services that are fit for an agile organization. And that's, again, bringing in the customer voice, inviting them to co-create and shape the services that HR provides. And sometimes it starts with looking at your existing services, finding out, are they too controlling? Or do you find this way of working, this process we have, to be empowering? You might hear that it's great. Some teams might say, you know what, it's actually a blocker. This way that we do performance management isn't really helpful for us. What if we did it team-based instead of individual-based, for instance? Big, important conversations can happen just by opening the dialogue around, how are we doing right now? What might we stop, start, and continue with these different services so they can be fit for an agile organization? And getting started with that, given what you learned today, what is one small step that you can take to start embedding that agility, customer experience, and employee experience into your HR services? Have you heard any through the stories that I shared or through the examples that got your gears turning so that you can get started on your Agile HR journey? You'll be getting a copy of these slides so that you can review, look through some case studies that are in there, as well as the different reflection points, so that hopefully you feel confident to start experimenting. And that concludes the HR for Agile portion, as well as our Agile for HR, where again, what we covered was applying an Agile mindset, principles, ways of working within HR teams, as well as how HR can evolve their processes to support an Agile organization. And hopefully you can also see how that by going Agile, HR can actually better support Agile. And what's beautiful is that you also get a resource that you can print out, hang up. It's the Agile HR in a Nutshell poster, where you're going to see a lot of the visualizations that we covered today when we talked about Agile for HR, embracing the mindset, ways of working, co-created employee experiences, evidence-based, the 2 ways of approaching change, faith-driven waterfall, or agile value-driven change, as well as HR for Agile. We looked at organizational design for Agile, understanding Agile organizations, Agile HR services. And then this part here, if you're curious about what's called Cynefin or modern Agile, you can definitely do some exploring of that after this session. Really interesting topics that we didn't have time to dive into today, but very relevant and very fun to explore. And so what you'll also get as part of the PDF of the slides is going to be a link to the poster, as well as the free nutshell training. So if you want to explore the basic concepts of agility, you get a free opportunity to use our learning platform and take what's called our Agile in a Nutshell training, which is super fun and very helpful even if you're new to Agile, even if you're a seasoned veteran. It's a resource that I love continuously going back to because it hits home all of the concrete essentials for going Agile. So if you're excited to start on your Agile HR journey, highly recommend checking out that training. And then, yes, sorry, for some reason it keeps flipping slides. Okay, so reflection question, that'll be in the PDF, as well as some design questions and case studies for inspiration, as I mentioned. And if you are interested in exploring more about moving your organization from more of a hierarchical, traditional organizational structure, where you've got that top-down communication flow and decision-making flow, moving it into a more network-based Agile structure, then join me next week, the same place, same time, for a webinar called You Get What You Organize For, where we're going to be exploring those topics in depth. So you're more than welcome to come next week as well. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We will open the floor to questions. Again, apologies for the strange slide sequence. They kept flipping, even though I was only pressing the down key once. So thank you for your grace while working through that technical blip. But apart from that, this concludes the Agile HR formal part of our presentation, and we will open the floor for questions.